Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shannon Derejo from Creamer Media. Welcome to our webinar on agriculture, where our panel of speakers will discuss the need to invest in the technologies and infrastructure that's needed to boost agricultural exports. Our webinar today is sponsored by Transnet Port Terminals, Astron Energy, John Deere, and SEW Eurodrive. We thank them for their support in making this event possible. Before we get started, please be aware that we've enabled the Q&A function, so please post any questions into the Q&A section. You'll find this on the panel at the bottom of your screen. The panelists will answer as many of your questions as possible throughout the discussion. Additionally, the chat feature is enabled for your comments and insights. Look for it right next to the Q&A. Remember though, questions should go into the Q&A and not in the chat box, as we may miss them. Post all your questions into the Q&A. Please be informed also that this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available to you afterwards. Also, we're broadcasting live on YouTube and the link will be shared in the chat once it becomes accessible. Today's webinar is facilitated by Professor Johan Kirsten. He's the Director of the Bureau for Economic Research at the University of Stellenbosch. Before this appointment, he was Professor in Agricultural Economics and Head of the Department of Agricultural Economics, Extension and Rural Development at the University of Pretoria. Johan will facilitate the discussion with our panel, which consists of Wandile Sihlobo, the Chief Economist at the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa, or AGBIZ, Jabu Mdaki, the CEO of Transnet Port Terminals, Matlau Kalaba, Senior Analyst and Director at the Bureau for Food and Agricultural Policy, or BFAP, as well as a Research Fellow at Stellenbosch University, and Dr. Boitshoko Nchabele, the CEO of the Citrus Growers Association. So without further ado, I'll hand over now to Johan Kirsten, who'll start the proceedings. Over to you, Johan.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you to the team at Creamer Media for putting agriculture on the spotlight today. I think it's a great opportunity and a very timely opportunity that you've created, because since last week, agriculture in South Africa got global attention through the meeting in the White House. So obviously, we also know that with the new president in the White House, things have become very unstable and uncertain for the global trade environment, and trade per definition is in uncertain terrain. Many people talk about the end of multilateralism and that we're entering a multipolar world, and that means a lot of interesting focus areas for agriculture, not only in terms of trade, but obviously in terms of our production, our technology, etc. So my panelists are all in this industry in various ways, and it's going to be quite interesting to hear how they deal with agriculture in this new setting. Obviously, in last week's engagements, a lot of untruths and falsehoods were communicated about agriculture in South Africa. And myself and Wandile recently published a book, The Uncomfortable Truth of South Africa's Agriculture, which you can read to help you wade through all the nonsense that are communicated about South Africa's agriculture. So please do read that. And I will also want to start with the conversation with Wandile to help us put the South African agriculture in its broader macro view in perspective, talk about our trade prospects and our trade performance over the last decade or so, but also to put the American issue on the spotlight through that lens. And also to note that we have the citrus growers represented by Boitshoko here. And we've seen, as me and Wandile communicated in one of our chapters in the Oxford University of Press Handbook on Agriculture, or Handbook of South African Economy, that citrus has grown to be one of the top 4 industries in the South African economy, from where in the before the 1980s, citrus did not feature in the top 10 at all. So now it is one of our key industries, one of our top export industries. And therefore, the issues of exports, trade, and infrastructure for exports are very important in this broader discussion. So enough from me. Let me then hand over to Wandile to help us get a broader picture and then talk about the issues that is top of mind today. Thanks, Wandile.
Thanks, Prof. And good afternoon to all of the folks that are joining us online. I think, Prof, I would perhaps maybe just briefly make two points. The first one, building on what you've just started now, that last week, the conversation at the White House and generally in South Africa did not mirror the reality of what we are experiencing in terms of how agriculture in South Africa has performed over time. I would even, Prof, stretch back to 1994, 31 years in democracy, and say, are things really falling apart in South Africa's agriculture? Are people running away and going to other countries and not wanting to farm in this sector? And my answer there would that no, that's not what's going on at all. If anything, we have seen this sector prosper, more than double in value and in volume terms. And there are two catalysts that have been behind that. It's a growth on the export. The global demand has been part and parcel of that catalyst. The second catalyst is the investments that the farmers have put at a primary level on improving their productivity, either mechanical or biological, in terms of the better genetics, and better seed cultivars. Those are all of the things that have been happening. That's the first point. The second aspect related to the US. The US becomes important because we now have this agricultural sector, which we arguably categorize it as export oriented. Half of what we produce, you can argue in value terms, goes to the export markets. Last year, Mato will tell you that we exported nearly 14 billion US dollars of agricultural exports. To be exact, that was $13.7 billion, a record level. Now, the US out of that, it's about 4%, close to $500 million. Now, some people have said this, Prof, and said, no, if it's 4%, why don't you just switch this 4% to China or to other regions? But that 4% is concentrated in a number of regions and in a number of commodities and a few critical regions. And I'm glad about this background behind me, because that citrus that you see there is a top product in agriculture that we send to the US alongside with wine, grapes, and the other products. The reason I'm highlighting that, Prof, then is that it was very important that in the communication with the White House, the point is made that if there's any punishment of the sector, in fact, they end up hurting the very same farmers that the US president cares about. But on our side, then, as South African agriculture, we, of course, value the US market because it's important for those industries, especially Western Cape, Mpumalanga, and the others that have nuts, wine, and grapes. Those are the two quick points that I think, Prof, in the backdrop of what happens, perhaps are important on mapping up that we are talking about the sector here, a sector that is growing and thriving and super important in terms of the South African economy.
Thanks, Wandile. Maybe just expand on the point that is important in terms of the theme of today is the technology for agriculture, and maybe highlight to the folks the contribution of technology in productivity growth in South Africa's agriculture over the last 30 years. And maybe that's an important segue before we go into the trade dimension.
I think, Prof, on that, the whole technology story, you can also even view it in two parts. One, you have the mechanical side. And if the folks look again in our screens here on the right-hand side, you will see DA, you will see Transnet and the other colleagues. Those technology providers, Transnet on the logistics, enables the trade and all of the export activities that we talk about. But DA and the others are also some of the technology providers in agriculture that helps us in terms of the efficiency of what's going on in agriculture. But in addition to the efficiency, there's another dimension of the productivity, the agrochemicals, the seed cultivars, the genetics. Some of the countries that have not been as open to technology as in South Africa. You can take, for example, the staple grapes, the staple grain, just to get away from these oranges of boycotts that are next to me, and think about the grain farmers in the Free State and elsewhere. In the year 2000, before we adopted the seed varieties that we plant with now, we had the yield in South Africa, which was about 2 tons per hectare on average. If you look at the yield today, we are just over 6 tons per hectare. And there's a lot of studies, people like Manas Hose at BFEP and the others have demonstrated through their work about how this technology have been key in just the efficiency of improving the seed. Now, you could look in that technology dimension also again in 2 parts, because there's a private sector investing, but there's also a government that has been very open and embracing technology, which I think is an important thing we should commend, because in much of the African continent, you realize that the governments are not as embracing of the technology aspects. And I think that links with today's conversation, because tech, biological as well as mechanical, is really important on productivity and efficiencies in the sector and in the value chain.
Yeah, no, that's very important. And also important to note, there's a lot of that technology is imported, and that is obviously showing our dependence on our leading innovation countries in Europe and the US, and therefore there's always a trading element on the import side as well that we should consider. Matlo, Wandile always makes the point that we should diversify our export market and we should move away thinking about just the US. Is that a important scenario? But also, what are the dangers if we think about starting to think about exporting to China, to the Middle East, etc.? What are the key worries that cross the horizon when we go into that space?
Well, yeah, Wandile is the one with revolutionary ideas every time he comes on board. So one needs to be careful listening to him. Maybe just going a step back to the points that Wandile has made, and you also made a reference to that, Prof, when you kind of used the framework of what happened last week at the White House, but also even taking steps backwards into what has been, building up to that visit to the White House. And as he mentioned, an example of the US being, it may be at around 4 to 6% of our total agricultural exports. He also mentioned the fact that what has been building into or being said about the South African agriculture and the society and in general is not reality. And many people, of course, we do agree with him. But what we need to be careful of is that it can also define the future. It can define what future South Africa would look like unless we actually take this event seriously in addressing it, even if it includes repeating what has been said again and again, right? So, and it was just encouraging to see the South African government, relevant ministers, the business community, the labor, all in union, including sports people. They may not have a coherent message, but I think the overall message is that South Africa stands together. South Africa really wants this relationship, but furthermore, South Africa wants to make a point that we are, as United, addressing these issues. Now, on the issue of agriculture in particular, so the proportion of this diversification and the need to move or look into other markets, that has always been there because it's a form of, managing the risk. And in terms of trade, I would argue that South Africa has done that relatively well. Of course, we can always do it better. You mentioned in the 1980s, the proportion of citrus in the total export share relative to today, where it is in the top products. The same can be said about the African market in 1994. It was less than the exports of agricultural products were less than just 10% of all exports to other regions in the world. But over time, today in agriculture, South Africa's exports, more than 1/3 going towards 40%, goes towards the African market. Of course, it can still be diversified. It's still largely neighboring countries. It's still largely SADC. But all the points around this are that we can do the same in the light of the new challenges that we are facing. We are also continuing to see disruptions from other global shocks, global events that from time to time bring in volatility. However, the South African agriculture, and in particular exports, due to the orientation that Wandile spoke about, remained resilient. Yes, 2 or 3 years we may look down, we may go down, but I think we managed to really navigate these rough waters. If you look at the drought that we had in the last, say, 10, 8 years, and then we entered into COVID, then there's war in Ukraine and Russia, which affected the inputs Wandile was talking about, the prices in general, as well as exports. And here we are today. And I do not have any doubt that we will manage this situation. It may not be nice being in it. It may have some negative effects. It may also bring 1 or 2 people, institutions down. But at the end, as a country, as a sector, we'll come out of that much better, much stronger. Maybe my last point in terms of diversification, Prof, is that if there is one region of the world where there are opportunities and we haven't really penetrated that, is more on the East Asian side, where you have an opportunity due to the growing market, the growing income, the largest population, in the world. And we are nowhere near our competitors in that region in terms of market access, in terms of competitiveness, in terms of really spreading through that region. And for that reason, we are missing opportunities. And I think if one of the answers to the current situation is to diversify, that would be the region that I would say we need to prioritize as a country and as a sector.
Yes, but I want to pick up on that point, Matlo, because obviously when you diversify to these important markets that you've just mentioned, you are faced with those competitors. What are the threats that they expose or will they present to us? Just expand a bit on those potential threats that we're going to face if we go into those markets.
Well, I mean, in those markets, particularly the one that I used as examples, there is dominance of the South American countries, the likes of Peru, Argentina, Venezuela, which are very strong in the products that agricultural products, agricultural processed products, not to mention Brazil more in the processed side. They have been in those markets being used to the regulatory requirements that they were required to comply with over the period of time. However, our largest share of agricultural exports, in my view, and with Soko is here, he can actually refute that point or concur with me, is that going to the US and the European Union consistently over the past 30 years, we've been facing some of the most stringent regulatory requirements, some of the most complex sanitary and phytosanitary measures, as well as just the general need to be on point with every export product. So having dealt with that for so many decades, I'm confident that opening new opportunities, opening new markets will still stand as firm against competition that exists already. But of course, advantage of those competitors is that they have a track record, they have a market share, they already have clients which will have to fight very hard to enter into those spaces.
Thank you very much, Matlo. So since citrus is sort of our core focus, it's good to bring Bochoko into the game now. And as Wandile has highlighted, it is quite fascinating to see how the citrus industry has grown in South Africa, the expansion of plantations, the growth in productivity, adoption of new irrigation technology, new varieties, all developed by private companies with planting rights, what do they call it, plant breeders' rights, yields that have increased from 30 tons a hectare to 60 tons a hectare. And nowadays, you can't make profits if you're not above 40 tons a hectare, I understand. So the citrus industry has grown from strength to strength, and obviously has been a winner in the export market. So, Boitshoko, with Trumps and tariffs and terminals, how do you read the new landscape for citrus? What are the things that bothers you, and what are the challenges that you want to embark upon?
Thanks, Professor, and thanks, Wandile and Matlo. I think, Matlo, I agree 100% with you in terms of the challenges that we've been facing over what we call traditional markets. That's the US and the EU. So as you say, Prof, Trump has also wedged himself into some of our challenges in that market, in that the punitive tariff that he wants to be placed on South African produce simply takes us out of that market. We at 30% tariff, we will not be very competitive in the US. So there are 2 points to try and make across. If you talk about the growth that we are experiencing and that we are foreseeing, it's something that we've been building over the years. We have what we call Vision 260. Vision 260 is everyone in our sector focused on ensuring that we ultimately by 2032 export 260 million cartons. So that is our focus. And we believe, based on our model, that we are tracking very well. In fact, this year it's very good for us in that the markets are nicely coming along. And with our cooperation with Transnet, we are making good progress in terms of ensuring that the fruit that reaches the ports is quickly loaded and dispatched to export destinations. The challenge with Trump indicates a very important point for us, the need for diversification of markets. If you read our newsletter of this last weekend, that's precisely the point that we are making. But we are also saying that in a crisis of this nature, we have a huge opportunity in that 185 countries are negotiating with Trump in terms of the tariffs. What stops all of us from negotiating with each other and resolve the trade issues, whether it's tariffs or NTBs, non-tariff barriers, to try and find, if you like, a way that we expand market access for each other. So for me, that's one thing that we might be missing, focusing only on the Trump tariffs. We have opportunity to trade with India. The biggest challenge we are facing there is higher tariffs. Why are we not able to say, India, you're already in discussions with the US on tariffs. This is our situation from a South African point of view. Let's address the tariff issues between us and yourself.
Thank you. Let's explore two things more. Boitshoko, Matlu talked about the regulatory landscape in Europe, non-tariff barriers, black spot versus codling moth. What's the latest on that field? And then, because this has been part of your career sitting in Brussels for years, so you can tell us the dirty European politics here. And then the other issue that has been bogging the industry for the years, and that will lead me eventually to discussion with Jabu, has been the export harbors, the export terminals. What's your latest reading on those issues, and are you comfortable that the interventions that have been coming onto play have alleviated your constraints in dealing with the export efficiency?
Thanks for those questions, Prof. I think we must also play nicely here. You mustn't make me and Jabu fight with each other on this platform. But on a serious note, talking to the issue of FCM, false cotton moth, and citrus black spot. So those have been coming over a number of years as SPS measures that the EU are using to contain and exports from South Africa into the EU. Those come at a huge cost. We did a study with BIFAP that estimated that on an annual basis, the compliance and the waste that we have to go through to maintain that market comes to 3.7 billion rand. So if you take that number, if we deal with this matter as we are at the World Trade Organization in terms of the dispute settlement process, we could easily put that money back and improve profitability of citrus growers. That for me is number one. So we need to expedite working with government and other stakeholders to ensure that we resolve that question. It's been long standing. My sense is that over time, we are also going to start seeing deterioration in terms of profitability if this continues, and hence the need for diversification of markets. In terms of the ports and terminals, you would have seen last week that our friends at Transnet put out a very good op-ed showing the investments that they made. It followed the meeting that we've had. So we're having very constructive discussions in terms of how we are going to manage the season. The season has been slow, but we are beginning to see the pickup. Transnet has come up with additional people, and they've also have additional equipment delivered. They're doing upgrades. So it all seems good so far. So if you look at our table that we produce on a weekly basis on Fridays, we are able to have the fruit that has come to the port quickly dispatched to destination. So it all looks good. Touch wood, it stays the same for the rest of the season. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bachoko. Jabu, so provide the audience with more detail of what were the actions that you've implemented in the last year or so to deal with those big concerns. And tell us about the potential plans with private partners in the various export terminals that you have in the pipeline. That would be very good to know, because I think there's been communication on that, but we don't know all the details. So here's a great opportunity for you to enlighten us. Jabu, you're on mute.
Apologies for that. Good afternoon, Professor, and good afternoon to the viewers. Yeah, we've done a lot of work in terms of upgrading the terminals, investing in infrastructure. There's a lot of groundwork that we have done. We are seeing now the results of that. Where in the previous years, we were working to conclude a long-term agreement with the OEMs, both for the maintenance and the supply of the machines. And in terms of the supply of the machines, you would have seen that we've already taken delivery of the RTGs, the struggle carriers, the ship-to-shore cranes in PCT, Durban, and in Cape Town as well. What is also important is that we are not just replacing equipment, but we are equipping ourselves for the new challenges that we are facing. With the inclement weather that we are faced with, especially in the Eastern Cape as well as in Cape Town, the equipment that we are deploying has the technology to be able to operate at elevated wind speed. So they've got the latest in terms of the anti-sway technology. We will be able to operate up to a wind speed of 90 kilometers per hour, unlike the current ones where we stop operations at 70 kilometers per hour. So that will buy us another additional time to continue operating and be able to move the product. I think the work that we are doing goes hand in hand with what we are doing with our people, because we are labor-intensive operations. We require the operators and the people to run our operations. We've introduced the incentives that are aligned to productivity. Those started in December last year, and we've seen the turnaround in terms of the morale of the people, in terms of, and I think that has been reflected by some of the customers as well as the shipping lines that they do see those. And I'm happy to advise that because the ones that we introduced in December was going to run until March. We've gone back to the Group Exco. They have been now approved so that we can continue with those improvements this year. So the incentives will continue. There's a lot of improvements, and the morale on the ground is quite high. We are also investing in the technology, upgrading our systems, working quite well with our group colleagues to ensure that our network systems are always up. Some of the people that interact with the terminals will know that the huge impact that we suffer if the network is down. Those incidences have decreased over a period of time. It's become a rare incident now that we will have a network that is unavailable or that is down. And that is thanks to the support that our ICT teams are doing with the support of our colleagues from group. So we are investing in the capacity to ensure that the markets that our colleagues are talking about, whenever there is that increase, we are in a position to be able to service them and meet the demand. As Dr. B has indicated, we also bring in the additional resources and people to be able to meet the reefer season. I mean, over the past 3 years, we've handled over 750,000 tons containers through our ports. We've moved just over 9 million tons of grain through our bulk terminals, whether it's importing or exporting in various terminals. So we do play a critical role in supporting the agri sector, and we intend continuing to play that role. Coming back to the PSP, I mean, before we even get to the PSP, I think it's worth noting that at the peak of the crisis that we had when we had the vessels that were congested in Durban, we identified that we needed to get equipment and get it fast. We went out to the shipping lines looking for urgent injection of the equipment. We got some good responses and collaboration from them, where some of them, for example, had placed orders for the equipment that we are going to be delivered in their terminals. They were able to redirect those equipment into our terminals, most notably MSC. We got quite a number of new equipment that was destined for their terminals that they redirected to TPT, the haulers, the reach stackers, and other equipment. We are also quite optimistic with the RFI that the minister has sent out to the market. Based on the discussions that we've had with the industry players and the customers and stakeholders, you can see that there's a lot of interest. And the intention is that we resolve the logistics in South Africa. It's not just about saying to how do we assist Transnet, but how do we have a long-lasting solutions for the logistics in South Africa. And as TPT and Transnet, I mean, will always be having a critical role in playing in resolving those logistics in the country. So we are looking forward to see what comes out of the RFI, but as I've indicated to you, there is quite a lot of interest in partnering and participating in some of the initiatives that we're undertaking to ensure that we catapult our terminals and operations to world-class operations in the shortest period of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jabu. What would you say were the main things that brought about the turnaround from last year or the year before's crisis? Was it this procurement system that you've improved, the contribution by the various partners? Was it a co-management of some of the terminals with the private sector, including citrus growers, for example? What were the sort of key moment that changed and all of this for the better?
Look, when the president started the NLCC, the National Logistics Crisis Committee, that presented us with an opportunity to work with some of the key stakeholders in the industry. I mean, I sit in the committees where, for example, the CEO of SAF, Jonita Marais, is in the same CRT committee. So it's not the industry on the outside criticizing and looking at what is happening inside, but it's actually rolling up the sleeves and working together with us, looking at the solutions. So there's a lot of collaboration that we've had. We've been engaging with the stakeholders quite positively. We do not have any adversarial relationship. So that also helps because you are able to go to the industry when you are in trouble to say, these are the challenges that are facing us. This is what we are requesting of you to behave, how you need to behave during this period where we are faced with these challenges until we get out of these challenges. So it might require, for example, it did require us to change some of them, maybe the rules and those things, but that was done in a collaborative manner. While at the same time, we also saw quite the interest from the government to try and assist us with relaxing some of the procurement rules and regulations, as you correctly point out. Look, they are still a challenge, but the relaxation has helped quite a lot because the procurement processes, the lengthy procurement processes that we used to undertake, we now have revenue generation processes that shorten those processes so that we can be able to get the spares or the service providers on board as quickly as possible to do that turnaround. But I cannot point it to one single thing. It's been a hard work involving everyone, and it's not all the time that we're agreeing. There were times where we're having differences, but at the end of the day, it is how we agreed that we're going to move forward that we're able to see the benefits. If I look at where we are now, the minister is on record, for example, to say that her objective is to see a TPT or our container terminals achieving a gross GCH of 30 moves per hour. That is the gross crane moves per hour. It measures the efficiency of individual crane performance. We broke that into like short-term objectives to say that for this financial year we want to a GCH of 20, and we're coming from a low base in some of the terminals like Cape Town of 11. I'm happy to advise you that none of our terminals are at this stage below a GCH of 15. I mean, Cape Town is sitting comfortably at 17. The Eastern Cape terminals are already at about 21. Durban terminals are coming up with the new equipment that we are seeing. That in return then will be contributing to what we call the ship working hour, or yes. So it's the productivity with which we are servicing the vessel. If we are giving the vessels that efficiency, we are able to turn those vessels around much more quicker. and we become attractive as the port and the country for the vessels to visit our terminals.
Okay, that's very good to know and also good to hear, Jabu. Obviously, as we talk export markets, talk about diversification of export destinations, you obviously need to have efficient working ports, and this is critical for the growth of our sector and the growth of our whole economy. So the crisis has really created an opportunity for us to invest in proper things and proper procedures and so on. And I believe at least you have spare tires now for the cranes in stock.
There can never be enough, but yes, no, we've put measures in place to ensure that the long-term contracts are there, the relationship with the service providers, and also the contracts are there. The critical thing with the long-term contracts that we've signed with the OEMs is that we do not only procure this equipment and then they walk away, but we need them to develop to upskill people in the country, to employ people so that they can be able to support the equipment that we are buying from them. They need to have the sufficient warehouses that they keep the necessary space that we require, so that we do not have to wait, weeks and days for them to get the space. Yeah,
that's very good. Boitsoko, I want to put you on the spot before you fight with Jabu. Are you comfortable and happy with the progress that you've witnessed and as one of the important stakeholders in the game?
Don't want to let that one go, Professor. But I think we've had a very slow start to the season, and it is encouraging. So to use the phrase that my team keeps saying every time we have discussions, they say to me, we are cautiously optimistic.
Okay.
Yes. So we're going to be hitting the peak very soon, and we will see how the plans that our colleagues at Transnet have put in place hold. But I think the one thing for me, listening to all the points and the questions you're asking and how Jabu replies, it's quite clear that what has been a bit of a game changer is the PSP. How we are able to collaborate across the private sector and government to ensure that there are solutions in place. And maybe that's something that we need to probe a little bit further to say, how do we take that to the next level? We all are aware that there's a particular case at Pier 2 that is stuck in a legal quagmire, and that will follow its own process. But it is our view that perhaps on a long-term basis, it becomes important that that becomes part of the MO modus operandi for Transnet. Yeah.
Okay. I saw one of the questions in the Q&A about technology used to monitor quality and temperature in the containers while it's shipped. Presumably that is now standard with all citrus exports, or is this still developing?
No, that is fairly standard. I think it's part of quality, but it's also part of your phyto requirements. So it's fairly standard in terms of cold jitter.
You can trace it, and you can also see where it is in terms of its destination.
Absolutely. And in some instances, at endpoint inspection, they can almost take that recorder and print out a graph to see the variability in temperatures over the entire trip.
Okay. Wandile, since Agbus was very much involved in this whole debate with Transnet port terminals and with the industry, what is your reading of Jabu's commentary and the progress?
Look, Prof, I think I would again say two things here. One, while in the past few years we have all complained when Jabu and the colleagues are experiencing some difficulties, we do need to give them credit. Because Transnet is not like Eskom where you can put on your solar and do all your other things. If Transnet is not there, you have a problem. Now, if we all agree then that last year exports were at a record level, $13.7 billion, we have to also accept that that is not just a function of a price. The volume that went out was also quite significant. And that means then our ports and all of the work that Jabu and the colleagues are doing there, regardless of the difficulties that we experience. But that's a good thing to say kudos on that and the collaboration that is being made. It's about then now, Jabu, to say, how do we accelerate that? The second point then, which comes to the points that you were making, Dr. B says he's cautiously optimistic. I would say on my side, I am encouraged to hear what you are saying, Jabu. Then the key thing then now is about how do we continue to make those improvements. What is also encouraging, Prof, on Jabu's point, is the long-term thinking that they are having. Because the reality is that we are sitting to where we are sitting now. But when we think about agriculture, the technological adoption that are going to come in future are going to further develop and grow the yields. Dr. B is talking about Vision 260, which means he's going to grow the volume. Matlo and the colleagues at BFAP, they are talking about all of these fruits that is going to come into the market, increasing by plus 30% or so in volume in the coming years, adding everything now, not just citrus, which again then talks to the pressure that is going to come to our ports. Then those preparation that Jabu is having, where he says he's thinking about near term, but also thinking about long term, what he's going to do. I'm encouraged by that preparation. All we need to do now is to sync what BFAP is forecasting, what Dr. B is forecasting, what we are seeing on our side, and making sure that we are all prepared, because there's no exports activity that will go out without the ports. And lastly, as you always say, Prof, whenever I talk about exports and I'm excited, he dumps the water, Jabu, and he says, yeah, but call your friends at Transnet to first get their game together. Now that you have said this, I'm sure I'm not going to be told that because he too is encouraged, Jabu. Thank you.
Yeah, I also remain cautiously optimistic. Let me throw a spanner in the works here and bring in the topic for Matlo first, then Wandile and Bochoko on the EU Green Deal. What is the threat for South Africa's agriculture on the EU Green Deal, Matlo? Is there something we need to worry about? Is it going to destroy our input industry? Is it going to destroy our export industry? What's the view from you? And then I'll ask Wandile and Botsoko to respond to you.
I think the two are better placed to talk about that than I do. But just on a serious note, it's one of those interventions that actually make you move forward. If we value this market in as much as we don't want to lose the US market, once the compliance indicators are put out there and we want to preserve the market, it is up to us to quite adopt and try to comply, even at a price. I mean, we mentioned the expenses of just complying with the CBS, citrus black spots, and the forced codling moth. I mean, he's talking about, yes, 3 billion. We had a period when, the orchards used to be sprayed no more than 3 times. Now, if you are targeting the EU market, as an example, you have to get to that level where you spray about 7 times, which is what now takes the cost from where it was to 3 billion. But the return to that is that, other than the increase in volumes that Jabu is talking about, the value that Wandile mentioned, is that the sector was able to comply and get those returns back. And I see the Green Deal as something that has been introduced by the policies or agreements that are superseding agricultural trade as just as the Paris Agreement. So as part of compliance, as part of adapting to climate change and reducing the temperature, atmospheric temperatures levels, EU has taken the first steps and is asking everyone to comply. And in that process, there are costs and consequences linked to that. And as I said, part of trying to preserve that market, in addition to the negotiation, allowing for transition, we can talk about the WTO tribunal, but that is slightly different from what we're talking about, is that there's a room for engagement while we are moving towards that. I don't think it will destroy our sector. I don't think it will destroy even the horticulture per se. But I do believe that if it goes ahead and gets implemented, it becomes a game changer. It becomes something that makes trade, makes compliance. I would even go back as to saying the production and productivity will have to look different from what it is today. But
Okay.
it's part of what I mentioned at the beginning to say, volatility, shocks, and things that are happening that are, let's say, outside what we call normal. It's actually the normal that we will be operating in, and it's just about agility and adaptation to that where possible. But
Okay,
once I
thanks.
see you nodding, surely
Wandile, I
you.
see Wandile has got a different revolutionary view on the Green Deal. So what is your saying here?
No, Mato is more polished than me. He's trying to justify the Green Deal is dead. The point is clear. And that was said also at the CGA. And I mean, he was not killed by us. The farmers in Europe, they went on strike complaining about all kinds of things. Environmental policies, pesticides use. We celebrated when they said those things. We stopped celebrating when they started saying, oh, also stop the imports. Because the European farmers are also protectionist, the French farmers to be specific. So there's all of those. But to your point, Prof, I think, though, the principle contained in the Green Deal, there are some useful one about thinking about the environment and producing sustainable way. And South Africa already engages on that. But I do think that the drastic reduction of even some of the agrochemicals that are useful for productivity is something that was not catered for. And I was glad to see the farmers in the EU standing up on some of these things. My sense is that now, even in this environment, of changing in just the environmental policies globally, we may not be walking down that path as fast as we had imagined about 2 years ago. But I was nodding to Matlo because the unpredictability of the environment is the reality that we have to deal with now, either environmentally, generally, or trade policy, or any regulation. I'll close quickly by saying this. A number of countries are using tariffs, not a number of countries. One country uses tariffs. But my sense is that this protectionism is not starting only with the US. Since COVID started, there's been a change and a reorientation of thinking about trade policy. Others like Europe using more non-tariff barriers. And my sense would be South Africa at this point, as we are diversifying, and I'm tapping just quickly to a point I saw in here, in the chart. As we are diversifying, thinking about going to BRICS and the other areas, it is going to become more and more difficult to expand to other markets. It's not like in the early 2000s where we were all juiced up and thinking about globalization. This time around, people are looking inward. But yes, the BRICS plus countries are an area to expand to. And of course, they account for half of global agricultural trade. I'm not raising this because I sit in BRICS structures, Prof. I know you're looking at me. I'm raising it because of what someone raised in the chat room. Thank you.
Yeah, and I wanted to come to you on that topic because I know you're very pro-BRICS and you caused Trump to be angry with us being pro-BRICS. So I think we need to sanitize your engagements in the diplomacy these days. Poitsoko, what is your view on the Green Deal? And then you can also jump in with BRICS as well at the same time.
No. Thanks, Prof, and thanks.
BRICS is a progressive agenda.
Wandile is very pro and gung ho on BRICS, but on a serious note, look, you got to realize that what was driving the Green Deal was primarily a protectionist agenda. Secondarily, it's also important that it was veering off what is premised in terms of WTO principles, that whenever you have molecules that you wanted to remove for health purposes, it has to be based on sound risk assessment. What the EU policy wanted to do was to use a hazard-based approach. And the difference in simple terms is that something is hazardous because it can cause death, but it first has to come into contact with a biological being and then be used in that space. But simply to know that it is a hazard, and on the basis of its hazardousness, you then ban it. It has not been helpful even for Europe itself. And that's really what led to the new thinking. So the new thinking was really, no, we are outsourcing our food security, and more often than not, EU policy is not very clear. It's very succinct in how they try to model what they want to achieve. So the new approach is premised on ensuring that they again retool their farmers and ensure that their farmers have access to that chemistry and then are able to produce food within Europe and also improve their profitability. They've also now added further protectionism in that what they now say is that if something is banned in the EU, they have what they call a mirroring clause, which says that even in your country, you have to comply to the same law that they apply in Europe. And it's something that is we are watching very closely, and how it's going to impact our ability to access that market. Prof, I forgot the second question you were asking me.
Wandile's optimism about BRICS.
Look, I think the most important thing that we should now realize is that, you know, the portfolio management theory applies to BRICS too, that we need to diversify so that if something happens that gives you more profit and the other one gives you losses, it balances out ultimately, because we have to manage risk. I think for me, the biggest lesson that has come out of Trump and Trumpism is that we need to manage our risk better, and that we need to try and get into all markets and ensure that you've got your finger there, because I foresee that the next 5 years are going to be based on protectionist policies, and you are going to see that also come from our BRICS partners.
Yeah. Soon Russia won't have a port or an airport, so then we don't have Russia as a market anymore.
The idea, Prof, is for South Africa's trade policy to take an approach where we embrace friendships with everyone. In BRICS at this moment, we haven't been paid for much of the trouble that we get. The South African agriculture exports to BRICS, they are less than 10%, almost equal to what we send to the UK. And I think that enthusiasm is about widening that while retaining relationship in other regions. Thank you.
Okay, very good. I want to bring Jabu in as we starting to wrap up. Since we talk about technology as well, Jabu, I've heard you talk the other day about reefers on rail. What's the future on this? I know it's not your topic, but I believe it's something that is being contemplated within the broader Transnet family. Can you provide us a few points on that?
No, thank you, Prof. We are working very closely with the TFR because it's part of our long-term strategy to migrate the cargo, from road to rail. In Western Cape, for example, we are doing that quite well with connecting the Belcon precinct with the terminal. And it also then complements the terminal when we have these wind interruptions. In Durban, we are working quite closely to try and ramp up with the back of port in Bayhead terminal. But there is an opportunity for us to expand that rail utilization to the outlying areas, as well as connecting to areas like your deep city in Johannesburg and beyond. So it's a project that we are undertaking. With the reform that is being undertaken, you'll notice that there is work that there is also an offer, for participants to be part of the central corridor, the one that is connecting Johannesburg and Durban. We do expect that should that be revitalized, it will create opportunities for more cargo to be on rail. But even as we speak, currently TFR is also ramping up the cargo and the number of trains that they are running on that central corridor. So there is quite an interest to revitalize our rail networks, make them useful, and migrating the cargo from road to rail. I'm sure that if my colleague Russell were here, he will be talking about a great plans that they've got in terms of getting the rail to work to its former glory. Thank you.
Yeah, and there's also, I remember there's also been advertisements for slots on the rail that for private sector participants that you guys have advertised. So that is also going to help the whole revitalization process in the rail as well.
That is quite correct. So there is opportunities. We need to increase the density in terms of the cargo that is moved, especially in the central corridor.
Yeah. Okay, Matlo, there's one question that I wanted to let you answer, but Wandile had to log off, but he will also be able to contribute in this, the whole issue of the role of the bioeconomy in the broader agricultural strategy in terms of using agricultural feedstocks in various dimensions. Biofuel is an option, but there's also a number of other dimensions of the bioeconomy. What's the sort of view from the BFAP stable about biofuels, the bioeconomy in broader terms that you could bring to the table?
Well, there's certainly an opportunity in that area. There is value in exploring that. On the feed side, actually, there are a number of exports. I mean, before Wandile left, he mentioned the UK, that go towards the UK and other markets. The growth is coming off a very low volume, but there it is coming up. But whether it can be sustained and the volumes can be increased, it's a big caution in the sense that if you expand it to consider other products that are like the biofuels that can be used, then you create competition even internally between those commodities, but as well as land. I mean, if you think a few years back on biofuels, commodities like sugar and even maize were considered, but then you have to weigh that against the productivity or the profitability that you get from selling a different product. So there are some developments that are coming through, and it may need to be sustained, but I think on a case by case, that value, that market can be grown. It's just a concern here and there where when things change, then the land as well as the product or the second byproduct that may create a shortage or market disruption elsewhere. But it's certainly an opportunity. As Wandile earlier said, that I mean, half of our production gets exported. That means that we have sufficient area with productivity to actually meet our local demand as well as focusing elsewhere, including other products.
Okay, thank you very much, Matlo. Maybe in closing, then I would allow Boitshoko and Jabu just to have some closing comments or something that they wanted to share with the audience. Anything, Boitshoko, from your side?
I think perhaps one of the things that we didn't mention in the discussion is, the investment in research, that it's necessary, and that needs to be sustained if we are going to ensure that agriculture remains competitive. It's something that we are aware of and that we drive at CGA. I think it's much more pertinent now with biosecurity challenges that the world faces, that we need new tools, we need new solutions. And if I give the example in the animal world, we've struggled now for the last 4 years with foot and mouth disease, and either the virus has changed and the tools that we are using are not effective. So there's need for much more investment in general terms, in terms of ensuring that we have strong research that will give us increased yields, whether it's plant animals or elsewhere. But it also gives us the tools to manage risk. Thank you.
That's very important, because it's the research that brings about the technology and the innovation that helps with your productivity and your risk mitigating strategies. And it's always been encouraging to see how the citrus growers have established CRI, Citrus Research International, to do this, and also collaborate with the state through the Agricultural Research Council. And that's the type of model that we should bring into play much more to strengthen our research framework and our research stability. Because if we don't do that, the state and the private sector is too small to do it, because research is a long-term endeavor. It's 25 years before you get results of a new variety, etc. So thank you very much for highlighting that point, Boitshoko, very important. Jabu, any final remarks from your side?
No, thank you for the opportunity. But I think you were talking earlier on about the green agenda. Even as we invest and as we recover as TPT and Transnet, it's also important that we also appreciate that the industry that we are serving requires us to move with the times. So the equipment that we are investing in, that I think will be of interest to you and the viewers, is we are now investing in equipment that will help us reduce our carbon footprint. The RTGs that we're deploying are hybrid, so they will be using about 30% less diesel. That we need to keep that in mind as well, because we do see that in future that will be one of the criteria of that will be a determinant in terms of where people import their goods. So we also need to keep up with the needs of our customers. But we are quite optimistic about the future. We will continue investing, and I think this is just the beginning, and we'll continue recovering.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's very interesting. I didn't know about that, so it's very good to know that even this new technology can be applicable to the cranes that you use. Okay, back to Shannon. Thank you to the team members and panelists. It was very good to have your insights. Shannon, you can take over now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Johan. Matlau, did you have anything you wanted to say? I think we skipped over you.
That's Johan. He always treated me like a last born. In other words, I have nothing to contribute. But I think maybe in about 120 seconds, I can say two things, picking up from the questions. The issue of the opportunities in the African market, about the after, what it creates. And there's no doubt that the African market is also one of the growing in terms of the population numbers. We still are low in terms of the incomes relative to, the Asian and other parts of the world. However, we still remain, limited by, the logistics and infrastructure, as Jabu was talking. And as a result, we get limited to exports of unprocessed or semi-processed and non-perishables because of storage issues and the relevant required infrastructure for that purpose. So, but the overall opportunities are there. We just need to get over some of these barriers, which are largely internal. It's our own making as Africans, and the investment that is required in that area is quite a lot. But for the African market and the ambitions of the African Union to be realized, we need to go through these kind of barriers and remove them.
Thanks very much, Mantlau. Thanks, Johan. And that brings us to the end of our webinar. I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you very much to our facilitator, Johan Kirsten, for enabling an engaging discussion. Thank you also to our panelist, Wandile Sihlobo from the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa, Jabu Mdaki from Transnet Port Terminals, Matlao Kalaba from the Bureau for Food and Agricultural Policy, and Dr. Boitshoko Nchabele from the Citrus Growers Association. And thank you once again to our sponsors, Transnet Port Terminals, Astron Energy, John Deere, and SEW Eurodrive for their support in making this webinar possible. And finally, thank you to the attendees for taking the time to join us for this discussion on South Africa's agricultural industry. We hope you enjoyed the discussion and we appreciate your participation. Our next webinar takes place on Wednesday, the 25th of June at 2 p.m. and will focus on health and safety, where our panelists will unpack how to enhance collaboration to prevent workplace injuries and promote a culture of safety. The link to register for that webinar was shared in the chat. And finally, the recording of today's webinar will be sent to you in due course. And if you have any additional questions, please be in touch. You can reach us at shannon@creamermedia.co.za. Thank you everyone once again for your time, and goodbye.